All right. Welcome, everybody. We are here with the next session on the track 1 of the TYPO3 online community event. I'm very excited to have Daniel Siepmann here. So this is a Daniel-only stream currently. And but that's totally fine. He will talk to us about the topic, short introduction into TYPO3 is the topic of his talk. What is content is the subtitle, and we will get to that in a second. First, I'm gonna do the whole reminder stuff again. That this is a community-driven event, kind of a replacement event for all the canceled TYPO3 camps this year. And our sessions include the streaming of the talks and the streaming of the Q&A section after the talks. And after that, there is the possibility for registered users and registered participants of the event to talk to the speaker directly, to ask questions and to have a discussion, kind of like we know it from bar camps. And this experience you can get if you register for the event, which is still possible. Just visit our website at t3oce.org or click the registration link in the video description, and then you can be part of the whole experience. Now to our next talk, which will be held by Daniel Siepmann. He's already here in the Jitsi call, but like the previous session from Richard Haeser, he also has pre-recorded his talk. I know a lot of pre-recorded talks in this track today, but I promise we will have live sessions soon. And I think tomorrow there are only live sessions in the first track. So a few words about Daniel. He is a long-time TYPO3 contributor. He is part of the documentation team and does very important and ongoing work in the TYPO3 docs. He also has a blog where he shares some knowledge and some tutorials. Go check that out. And you probably know him from any of the many TYPO3 camps where he keeps talking. He's famous for being everywhere and have sessions and stuff. And today he's going to talk to us about a short introduction into TYPO3 and the magical question, what is content? Please put any questions into the chat that is beside the question, what is content? Because that's probably going to be answered by Daniel now. And the description or the summary of his talk reads as follows. What is content? How content can be edited? How content is rendered and displayed in Frontend? So that's the topics of his talk. This will cover TypoScript and HTML output, as well as the general possibility to generate further output formats. The goal is to provide an overview of the concepts and how they play together. So pretty neat stuff. And with that, I would say, please now relax. Spam the clap emoji in the Mattermost chat. Give a big round of applause for Daniel. And with that, we're going to start his talk. Enjoy.
Hello, and thanks for joining the talk. Before I introduce the talk itself, I introduce myself so you know who you are listening to. My name is Daniel Siepmann, and I'm living in Germany, Mönchengladbach, near the Dutch border, and I'm working with TYPO3 non-stop since 2009. I'm employed at Codepics GmbH here in Mönchengladbach since 2018, which I founded together with colleagues to be ourselves. We are helping other agencies and customers as well as freelancers in becoming better with TYPO3 and technologies working together with TYPO3, such as testing and continuous integration. You can profit from our knowledge and our explanations. So we are not only interested in providing working solutions to you, but also in explaining so you become better and can solve issues yourself in the future. I'm basically a backend developer, but I'm also interested in all kind of stuff, especially but not limited to NeoVim and Vim, Tmux and the shell, and automating other boring stuff. Regarding TYPO3, I'm part of the documentation team, and I've joined more or less all the DACH region camps the last 2 years, but obviously not this year. And you can find out more about me on my website as well on Twitter, and you can contact me on Slack all the time. Regarding my website, you can find more or less only TYPO3 content, blog posts, covering different areas, sorted by the supported TYPO3 versions. And you also can find out more about myself and our company. Today, I want to talk about what TYPO3 content is, how TYPO3 manages content, how you can add and edit content, and the most important thing, how TYPO3 allows you to configure and output those types of contents, and maybe also different types of formats, for example, beside HTML, also JSON. In the end, there's time to ask questions. As this talk is pre-recorded, I'm here to answer questions right beside the talk in the chat, but of course not right during I'm talking live, because this is pre-recorded. So I hope you enjoy this talk. Please remember that this is the first time I'm giving a talk this way, and there might be some issues, but yeah, please stay patient and have fun. Let's start with the first explanation. TYPO3 itself is a content management system and is not a website builder. So keep that in mind, because it makes a huge difference in certain areas. Let's start with a small explanation about that. TYPO3 itself claims it's an open source enterprise content management system. You can find more about that on Wikipedia, of course. So content management systems are software that allows you to manage content. They are distinguished between some other certain types, but that's not that important. The big difference is that TYPO3 itself is not intended to only build websites. Instead, it focuses on managing your content. Later on, we will see what content is and how TYPO3 allows you to manage this content. But keeping that in mind, that TYPO3 is not focusing only on website explains why you might have seen this error message when you've started with TYPO3. Because TYPO3 doesn't focus only on websites, TYPO3 doesn't come with a default output for your website. Because you might not even create a website, but something else. So you need to tell TYPO3 what you expect it to do. For example, whether it should generate HTML or PDFs, XML, JSON, or anything else. So TYPO3 explains that there is no template configured, which explains TYPO3 what to output. So that's the biggest difference between TYPO3 and maybe some other systems that strongly focus on HTML output. But TYPO3, of course, knows about the web because itself is a web application. So it allows you and provides some easy ways to get you started. Instead of TYPO3 within the list module, we will see more about that later, you can create this kind of template records. For now, this one is deactivated to show you this error message. Once it's activated, but still empty, let me clear everything that's coming from the examples of the file system. So TYPO3 now has a template, but still there is no configuration what to output for this current request. So let's start with a very first example. More on that will be explained later, but first let's demystify these very basic tasks. I'm not going to explain this right now, we will do that later on. So now we have our hello world, as you might expect, because that's some kind of text that we want to output on our page. The main thing why I'm showing this to you right now is that without any further stuff to do, TypoScript already creates appropriate HTML output with body, HTML, head, including canonical, generator, Twitter cards, some JavaScript, language, and stuff like that. So TypoScript still tries to provide the basics you need to create a website. First of all, we need to know how to add and edit content. To do so, we open the page module below the web part and select a page in the page tree. In this example, we have the German page Besprechungen. You can see that the page module is more like a wireframe mode for your website or print. You can have different columns and rows which reflect your layout, and you can have different layouts inside of the same TypoScript website. That way you can place your content in the expected parts of your page or print result. Let's create a new content element inside of our main part. We click on the plus content and can select from a range of our created or possible content elements that are known to our system. You can add your own, but that's not part of this talk. Let's create a very simple header-only content element. Once you have a record open inside of TypoScript, you have your form to edit the information of this record. In this case, let's add an actual header. Once you have saved your record, by example by pressing enter or by selecting the appropriate button, you can close the record. Don't be afraid if you have changed something and just close it by accident. TypoScript will warn you and ask how to proceed. For example, let you continue the editing, discard your changes, or save and close. Once you have added content element, it will show up at the position. You can drag and drop it, you can edit it, you can delete it, all these kind of things. Besides the page module, there's also the list module. The list module will show you all the records on the page. For example, on this page, there is not only the new header and the existing content element, but also subpages. And some pages will have content that's not visible in the page module because it's not part of the actual output, but it's more technical. For example, on this page, we have books, which are records for this website, which will not be displayed in the page module. So we have seen how to add and edit content. But what exactly is content? We have seen that we are managing a website in this case, and that we have content like headlines on our pages. But there's more. For example, on this page, we have different kind of records like normal text, which editors can create and edit, but also some other kind of content elements. Everything you can see on the page module are content elements. More to that later. So for example, here we can have a list of selected books that should be displayed. This is highly depending on the context of your company or customer. So content is not the same to everyone. Everyone has a different thinking about what is content. Content always depends on the context. In this example, the content is mostly about articles like discussion books or interviews, stuff like that, but also about the surrounding context. So in this example, in order to have some information about the books, so books themselves are also content in this TypoScript installation. So we can create and edit books as well. But as books aren't placed on a page like a normal content element, they are managed through the list module on a separate page. And you can see there's more. There are different kind of persons, institutions, events, and places where events can happen. So that are also kinds of contents for this specific customer. TYPO3 itself allows you to create and configure all those kind of different contents and provides a unique user experience to edit and create them and to connect them. But TYPO3 does not provide any kind of automation or any kind of API or framework to automate things. For example, if you think about adding your invoice system or to make your invoice system by using TYPO3, that doesn't work out of the box. But the great thing about TYPO3 is that it doesn't limit you in any area. It allows you to extend it at any single point. So for example, you still can extend TYPO3 to automate those kind of things. And you can also configure TYPO3 to display or to communicate with other third-party services, for example, with a REST API. So you can display records from a foreign system or update records in a foreign system or to import them, all those kind of things. Now that we know how to add and edit content as well as what is content, we need to know how to output content. So far, we still output our static text hello world, but we already have some kind of content in this installation. So how to output this type? As we have seen at the very beginning, TYPO3 itself needs those kind of template records. Inside of this template records, you can include files from the file system from TYPO3 extensions, which most people highly recommend. There are the concepts of side packages, which is out of the scope of this talk, so you should take a look at that one. I will start with how to edit and change things right in the database, so we don't leave TYPO3, but that's not the recommended way. I'll keep the first row. That's just deleting whatever is stored inside of page. You don't have to think about that. It just allows me to start with a clean state inside of this existing customer project I'm using for the demonstration purposes. So first, let's investigate what I've written here in order to generate the static output. So we have the basic understandings to have a ground starting with dynamic output. First of all, the left side is like a variable inside any programming language. So I can name that web page. I can leave out page and just use web, or even say this is a HTML output, but page is more or less what's used most of the time. We define that this is type of page. So TYPO3 has different kinds of types inside of his own configuration language, TypoScript, which is used inside of this field. You can open docs.typo3.org and head over to the core documentation, TypoScript, to get an overview of all those kind of things. We are on the top level, so we will investigate the top level, and we can see that there's page available. So this also explains what exactly pages are. You can have multiple different pages, which we will take a look at later on. For now, a page is a specific output format. The default is HTML, but you can disable all the HTML stuff we have seen before. So right now, TYPO3 outputs the doc type, the HTML tag, head tag, some kind of meta information, as well as a body tag. So you can disable that in order to generate PDFs, XML, JSON, whatever you like. If you have a look at the documentation, we get an overview of the different properties this object offers. So for example, we can include JavaScript, CSS, we can change the head tag, we can add data to the header or footer, we can provide settings, stuff like that. The most important part right now is this one. So we have the possibility to add C objects at certain positions. So in this case, tags is a C object, and C object is already linked. So C object is documented as well, and you can see which C objects are provided by TYPO3 by default. And as most other things, you can provide your own C objects as well. So if there's something missing, you can add it. TYPO3 itself allows, for example, to output text. So that's what's happening next. We define that on position 10, we want to output some kind of text. And if you take a look at text, we can see that the text has a value, which is a string, and that text should be outputted. So that means that I can add further output, for example, 20 equals text, 20.value gleich tomorrow. And you might expect that tomorrow comes before hello world, but actually TYPO3 sorts this list by numbers. So 20 comes after 10, so we will have hello world tomorrow. I will save this one and open the preview, and we will see hello world tomorrow. And you can also see the TYPO3 is outputting all those different texts right behind each other. So there's no white space. We can also inspect the page and can see that exactly our static text is outputted. As I've stated, that's not what we want to do. We want to output our content. And if you have a look at the overview of the C objects, we can see two things that might probably what we want. There's content and there are records. As we want to display content, we use content. Records more or less does the same, but it doesn't render the content. So as we want to render our content, we use content. Let me change text to content. And let's investigate what content offers. You can see content offers way more than our plain text element, which has a single value. With content, we can have an SQL select statement to fetch the content from our persistence, from our database. We can also define the table, so the kind of content. For example, content elements on a page are stored in the TD content table, but our books, for example, are stored in another table. So we could say we want to render the content from table books. We can limit and select with a specific ordering from a specific page ID. That's what PID stands for. We can define how to render the fetch content, and we can do a lot more, which is out of the scope right now. So let's change that and say we want to output content, and let's see how far this gets us. Let's take a further look at the page so we can see what we would expect. We would expect our header element, and let me deactivate the custom thing here. And this error just comes because we have a Solar installation here, and Solar is not activated right now. So let's go back to the TypoScript record and have a look at the front end. Right now we will get this error because TYPO3 does not know the table we want to use. So we need to provide this information. So let's add this info. Table is equal TT content, as we want to output the content elements from the current page. Let's reload, and voila, our content is already outputted. So what's going on here? That can't be everything you need to do. Yeah, it depends. Of course, there's something configured already, and we will investigate it right now. First of all, let's see what's actually outputted in the front end. We have a div with the UID of the content element, some classes, the actual header we have inserted, and that's it, because this one is a header content element and nothing else. So how does TYPO3 actually know how to render this content element? In order to understand that, let's leave this view and learn a new view. TYPO3 also provides the module template. This allows us to inspect the TypoScript template information. Once we open it, you need to select the proper sub action, like the TypoScript object browser, and you might need to switch to the setup from the constants. That are the two fields we can edit. And this one will provide an overview of all the past TypoScript setup. And you can see there's a lot more than I've shown you before, because we only focus on the HTML page output here. Let's open this to inspect what's in there. And as I've said before, I've removed everything else. So that's actually what we have written so far. And now to understand how TypoScript knows how to render and what to fetch, we need to have a further look at the documentation. And this is more or less the default. So if you don't add anything, TypoScript assumes that we want to output content from the current page, which is actually what we want to do. In contrast, the ordering is not the default. And TypoScript itself also will add the render object. So let's inspect those kind of things down here. If you open the select, these are all the options we have. And the pit-in list is by default this. So that's why we're getting content from the current page. Order by has no default. So we need to add to ensure that the ordering is the same as managed by the backend. So that's the select part. Now comes the render object. And the default for the render object is the actual table name. So as we didn't provide any render object, TypoScript will look up TD content, because that's the table we are fetching the content from, on the root. And we can see that TD content is already there. I didn't write it myself, but this is included by a third-party extension called Fluid Styled Content. Different extensions might already provide different TypoScripts. So you can have a look at the record below includes and can see that in this case, only our own side package is included. There are also further side packages static includes available, for example, the mentioned fluid styled content. In this particular case, they are not included via this record, but via the file system. But let's assume that it's this way, which it should be for your installation, depending on the workflow you're using. So that one is providing the rendering for all the provided content elements out of the box. Still, you can add your own. So now that we know where this TypoScript is coming from, let's dig deeper into this one. We know that TD content is used to describe how to render our fetched content from the database. Well, the content C object explains that this is used to render the records. Every record fetched from the database is rendered through this definition. So let's say you have 3 content elements, all of different types. So one header, one text, and one image. All of them needs different rendering, because an image has different rendering from your text and from your headline. So that's the reason why TD content itself is another C object in this case. And you can see that render object is a C object inside of the documentation. So the C object case is nothing new to people that are coming from programming languages. They often have a switch case. For everyone else, it explains, or let me explain it this way, that you put some specific value into this construct and it will match a specific case. So in this example, let's have a look. The key defines which value has to be provided. So in this case, it's a database field C type, so the content element type we have seen while editing. And now it checks which of this configuration is the case for this content element. So if we have our header, we can see that header is defined here and that image is defined and below text is defined and all other C types available in our system. So let's have a look at our header, because that's what we are actually outputting right now. We've already seen the equals. Now here's something new, and we don't equals a specific value, but are using equals lower. So that's a specific syntax inside of TypoScript. We are referencing a foreign path in this way. So all our content elements are mostly the same. They are rendered through a foreign template engine. So they all have to be set up the same way with the same paths to look up the templates and stuff like that. In order to not repeat this for every single content element, we can have it at the top and can reuse and reference it. So we will have a look at that in a moment. Right now, let's have a look further at the header. The header itself is more or less only defining the template to use, which is headers. And that's more or less the case for all other content elements as well. So having a look at lib content element will reveal the real rendering for this content element. So we can see that lib content element itself is using a C object again. In this case, this C object is fluid template, which means that we have a template somewhere which is passed through the fluid template engine, and the rendering result is used to represent the rendered result for this content element. And if we dig deeper, we can see that there are different paths set, for example, the layout root path, the partial root path, and the template root path. And we also have a template name default, which is overwritten in case of a header, for example. If you have a look at the file system, we first of all need to know where to look up the template paths. And here we have the order like for the page again. So it will look up in the reverse order. So 100 is more important than 10 is more important than 0. So first of all, look inside our own site package at this path. Therefore, I will go to my editor, open the project, and inside of our TYPO3 conf ext folder site package, below resources, private templates, which is the configured path, resources, private templates, we have content elements and can see our own fluid templates. As we can see, there is no definition for header in here yet. So we have to follow the chain and check fluid style content next. Now, fluid style content is not a third-party extension, so we don't have to look inside of TYPO3 conf-ext, but instead into TYPO3 sysext. So that's one reason why you should use ext : whenever possible in order to allow TYPO3 to resource the concrete installation path of the extension. Now inside our fluid style content resources, private templates, we can find the header HTML. Now, header doesn't contain much content. This HTML is removed while rendering, which is defined by this property, data namespace TYPO3 fluid true. So TYPO3 fluid will remove this tag, and this tag is only used in order to import fluid view helpers, which we don't cover yet. Now, here's a call to a view helper, which instructs Fluid to load the layout default. Now we need to go back and look up the layout. First of all, the layout could be in our site package, and if not found, it's inside of Fluid style content again. Now the default layout, opened in the right side, has some switches, like for example, it checks the frame class and has different output renderings. Now in our case, we know that there is this div ID C, as we have seen before. So if you open the inspector, we can see div ID C, and that's it. Because all content elements typically have a header, the header is built in the layout. So the header content element itself doesn't need to have its own HTML. Instead, it uses the generic header output logic already. Let's open another content element, for example, text. And you can see that this content element itself, again, is very basic. It's more or less the same, except that it defines a section main and outputs the data body text formatted through the format HTML view helper. So that way you can create a text content element. The data of the record is provided to your template instance. You can access the values from the database and can work with them through the view helpers. So in this case, they are outputted in a secure way. So that's the full chain how TYPO3 renders content. To sum it up, first of all, we say we want a page with a specific output format. The default is HTML. We want to add something to the output of this page. In this case, we want to add the page contents. For content we want to output, we need to define from where to fetch, from which database table. We can fine control from where to fetch this content. We can fine control how to render this content. If we don't define it for this particular use case, TYPO3 will find the default on the top level for this table. In the case of content records, content elements, TYPO3 will use the case, and we can define how to render each and every single content element. So there's not big magic involved. There are some concepts involved. They play nice together. And that's it. That's how to render content with TYPO3. Now that we know how to output content, the next thing you might want to know is how to add different output formats. I've already mentioned that TYPO3 can have different kinds of output, for example, XML, JSON, PDF, stuff like that. And TYPO3 also has a system extension called SIO, which provides a way to provide a sitemap, which is of the format XML. So let's use that as a basic example how to add further output formats. First of all, let me clean things up and close all the things we have investigated so far. TYPO3 shows the different types that are configured grayed out. So read only, that's not an actual value, that's just for debugging. And this way we can see, okay, page type 0, which is the default. Maybe you remember the error message we had in between, maps to the HTML. So that's just a reverse version. And 0 is the default if you have an instance of a page. And there's also 7076, which is a fluid Ajax widget response. Now, if we add the SIO extension, I'll use my own website for demonstration purposes. You can see that there is another output format configured. So in this case, below types, there's also the SIO sitemap with a huge number. So we can take a look at this one, and you can see that this is included from the SIO extension inside of the TypoScript folder. It's also of the type page because it has an output. But this time below 10 isn't text or content, but user. And we can look up the C object as well. And user stands for user-defined function. So a PHP function or method that's defined in the system. And this can be called. So in this case, this is a class and this is a method to call. This one will receive further configuration that you can provide. In order to call this one, you can open your front end and add the type parameter with the provided type num. So if you can see in below this one, there's a type num property with this value. So if you open the front end and add type equals this value, we can see the XML sitemap. And this doesn't look like XML, which confuses some people. But if you have a look at the source, it actually is XML. But besides that one, there's also an XSL delivered, which transforms this XML to HTML inside of your browser. So you can get a human-friendly output only inside of your browser. But actually, what is delivered is this sitemap index. And this contains further URLs in my example because I have an RSS feed beside my sitemap. And we can open this one, which doesn't include the type num anymore because of routing. This is translated to sitemap XML. And this time we have a pure sitemap based on XML output. So how does this happen? First of all, there is everything removed, which is by default. And some additional headers are added, like, okay, we are delivering XML, so the content type header is set, as well as that this should not be indexed. And the most important thing is disable all header code. So this disables the default HTML code that's outputted. Now, this is a very special use case. TypoScript provides this out of the box, and you can look up how to configure the sitemap inside of the official documentation. But this way, you can provide your very own output. For example, you could set up my Ajax gleich page equals page, can configure a different type num, can provide JSON, and can output whatever you like via content with alternative render object definitions. You can call your own PHP methods, all those kind of things. So that's the reason why TypoScript doesn't provide a default rendering out of the box, because it's up to you to decide whether you want to output HTML for a website, XML, provide a web service, what else makes sense to you.
Thank you, Daniel. Cool effect. Now we should be good. Cool effect. Now we should. Okay. Thank you, Daniel, for this very interesting talk. This was a very good introduction video for people maybe new to TYPO3. Very well made. Thank you very much for that. So I had a look to the Mattermost chat of your session.
Mm-hmm.
There were a few questions. First one was, and this maybe we can talk a little bit about it. Will this video be available after this event?
Yes, as far as I understood, you will add the stream for real life on YouTube, right?
Yes, that's the plan. So if you are fine with that,
yeah, sure.
I assume, then this and all other videos will be available at the YouTube channels or at the YouTube channel of T3OCE later. So we will check with the speakers if they agree to this. And of course, also Daniel has the opportunity to host this video by himself and add it to his blog or something like that. So very nice. So what do you think? Is making videos the new way for the TYPO3 documentation, or?
Not sure. I guess they should be provided or created, if possible, to extend the documentation, but shouldn't be a replacement for the written documentation. The poor thing is, as well as writing documentation, you need a lot of time to create videos. And as this was my first video, I've learned that it takes much longer to create a video than to write documentation.
Sure, but I got the feeling that it was it's way clearer or easier to understand these basics if you see somebody actually showing them to you while explaining than reading the text document. So yeah, that's very nice. So let's see if we have anything else.
Yeah, I can see one question regarding the type nums. Whether there is a general rule or logical system how to create the value for the type num. I'm not aware of any. I guess it's more or less the same as for the exceptions within the TYPO3 core. So I guess it's a Unix timestamp. One should know that TYPO3 internally cards them to an integer, so you are limited to the highest possible value PHP offers you. So that can depend on the current system you're running, whether you're using 60-bit or higher systems. But most of the time, people will either have a list of those for the system if they are creating the type nums on their own, have their own system, or using Unix timestamps, I guess. So, yeah. And in the end, as you have seen in the video, you have a list of all the created types on the bottom. So you can check whether value is already in use. Of course, if these are hidden inside of TypoScript conditions, you need to check the condition to have an overview. So I would not suggest to add type num definitions inside of conditions. So yeah, I hope that answers the question from Plus Interactive. And we had a second number, whether you can restrict TYPO3 to render a node only with a defined type num. Of course, that would be possible. I will share my screen. As you have learned, it's easier if you can see something. And let's open the documentation. And I will not try to repeat everything I've said in the video already. So if you still remember that every content element is defined below TT content and is of type C object, and all C objects should by default have standard wrap. So you can write TT content dot text equals fluid template, for example, and TT content dot text dot standard wrap. And this has the if section. So you can define that the whole node or element should only be rendered if a certain condition equals to true. You can negate this condition and can say, okay, just render if I'm on type num X, for example. So yeah, I hope that's also explaining or answering this question, Mozilla. And thanks for, as far as I remember, you offered me the ticket for the Dev Days in Düsseldorf some years ago. So I was able to join the Dev Days because you were sick, as far as I remember. Yeah, but I can't see any further questions.
Yeah, that's fine. We're just going to wait a few moments to see if anything comes up. And if not, then I will just go over to end the stream, and then you will be available for further questions and discussions, right?
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
And also, everyone is always invited to ask questions in the TYPO3 Slack. How to join is available on my.typo3.org, and there's also a beginners channel you can join. So in case you are afraid of asking people stupid questions, just join this channel, and there's no stupid question in general, but especially not in the beginners channel. Yeah, that's it.
All right, so I don't see a question on Twitter or something like that, and also not in the chat. So I will now say goodbye to everybody who is watching the stream on YouTube. We will sign off in a moment, and just a quick reminder, if you want to now join this this Jitsi call that is currently streamed and talk to Daniel directly, then you can do so by joining the chat infrastructure, the Mattermost channel of this talk. And this will be possible if you are registered to the event. So there's your step-by-step how you get to Daniel. Okay, so that's it for this session. Thank you all for watching, and have a nice lunch break, and goodbye.